At the beginning of the State of the Union address, in the middle of this kabuki dance of pageantry that they do there in the House chamber, we had Obama coming in after everybody else was seated, and as he walked towards the podium where he was going to give his State of the Union address, he comes across Tiny Tim Geithner, and he pauses to embrace Tiny Tim. He practically kissed him. It was a prolonged display of ostentatious affection coming from Obama to Geithner. This essentially vitiated, undermined, and canceled out anything serious that Obama tried to put in the State of the Union. There were a couple of useful points in the State of the Union address. The problem is, from the point of view of the current economic crisis and the need for economic populism as the precondition for economic and political survival, the embrace of Geithner in the full view of the entire regime, the House, the Senate, the Cabinet, the Supreme Court, all of them, and the TV cameras, the embrace of Geithner shortly before the speech began was essentially an act of political self-destruction. And this was the same day. We know that the Obama regime had spent the entire day shoring up support for the Wall Street puppet Bernanke, a Republican Ben Bernanke. So two Wall Street puppets, and let's not forget Larry Summers, the other principal Wall Street puppet. But these two most viewed. Geithner, probably the most prominent cabinet officer, given the laid-back approach by Gates and the somewhat off the U.S. screen activities of Madame Clinton. Geithner is the number one guy, especially in this depression. So you get up there and you essentially give a kiss and a hug to Geithner after Geithner had been pounded all afternoon by the House Financial Services. Sorry, this was the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, the Kanjorski Committee in the House, had pounded Geithner all afternoon because of his corrupt, duplicitous, illegal, felonious double-dealing in the AIG case. What did Obama understand? What did you get out of that Massachusetts vote, Obama? Remember, Mad Dog Bush the Younger in 2006, after the Republicans lost both houses of Congress, Mad Dog Bush, or at least his handlers, had the presence of mind to come out the next day and say, okay, I'm dumping Rumsfeld. I'm dumping the most unpopular, most odious, most hated member of the cabinet. And that was after losing both houses of Congress. Now, Obama, by now, should be able to see that he is on the way to a similar hecatomb. So the only thing for him to do is to come out and say, all right, Geithner, it's the afternoon of the State of the Union. It's the afternoon of Wednesday the 27th. Geithner, you resign before I go to the Congress, so I can announce that you've been dumped. And at that point, you'd be forcing you'd have the reactionary Republicans would have to applaud that because they don't like Geithner. But of course, they're happy to let Geithner do the work for Wall Street. In other words, Geithner, the Wall Street puppet, does the things that otherwise the Republicans would have to do. So he takes them off the hook. So the Republicans would be there biting their tongues in rage, even as they had to applaud the ouster of Geithner in order to they'd have to try to dupe their followers, but they'd really be enraged because they say, what? And then are we going to have to do this work and go out and take the flak for Wall Street in public? And, of course, then you'd have the Democratic liberal to left, liberal to New Deal, if there are any New Deal left, and there are a few. They would be sincerely applauding because of their great animus against Geithner. This sums up the present moment, I think, in a nutshell. The embrace of Geithner. Now, we can go through the State of the Union address. Much of it is of course, hogwash, but you have got this idea of building nuclear reactors. That is something to grab onto with both of your hands and your teeth and whatever else you've got. Grab onto that nuclear reactor provision, because that, if properly handled, could lead to a significant stimulus, or better yet, recovery program. In particular, Obama says he wants $30 billion for jobs. Now, of course, $30 billion for jobs is a little bit of a joke after you've just given $700 billion in a bailout to Wall Street, which Obama organized for, even though the idea came from Bush the Younger and Paulson and Bernanke and Geithner when he was at the New York Fed. $30 billion jobs bill won't do anything much. But if you said we're going to have a $30 billion jobs bill and we're going to use that to start 100 nuclear reactors, you could get them started. You could at least do the startup costs and get them on their way for 6 months or a year. That would be a stimulus. That would bring on recovery. The trick here being, of course, that if you pour money into low-wage service jobs, if you think that you're going to have a recovery based on Starbucks, McDonald's, and retail sales, that is no recovery at all. Recovery starts with capital goods, modern, high technology, high energy intensity, high labor intensity capital goods. But not the kind of stuff that would appeal to a Keynesian in the Democratic House caucus. But put together the opening to nuclear energy together with a $30 billion jobs bill, and you might have at least the opening wedge, the entry wedge of something serious. It's also interesting, if you look at the Obama speech there, what he did not talk about. There's nothing about Copenhagen. Does it mean that he's turning away from some of the insanity on cap and trade? He then repeated, of course, he wants a climate change bill, and he took a lot of laughter. He was mocked and ridiculed, essentially for saying, the science may not be reliable, but the incentives are still a great thing. And for that, he was mocked, and deservedly so. The entire fake castle of lies, this monstrous edifice of duplicity and quackery and quackademicry around the global warming, the anthropogenic global warming, and these ideas. This is now collapsing. It's now also found that the reports of the shrinking of the Himalayan glaciers is based on some spurious report from some kind of partisan radical environmentalist journalist professor out there in India, and then this was bootlegged into this monstrous UN report. So after the East Anglia Climate Research Unit fakery emails, we've now got a second round of that same scandal. So the credibility of this is collapsing at the same time that we have these cold waves sweeping across the Northern Hemisphere. There is a small attempt to fight back. Washington Post this week had an article about how the cold weather and the snow is actually a feature of the of global warming. And the idea is this, that the reason you have so much snow is because the Great Lakes are not as covered with ice as they normally would be, and this means that when the storms come over, they can pick up moisture and you get lake effect snow. If it were colder, you'd have less lake effect snow. That's a nice try for that particular gambit. But of course, the thing is, the massive evidence across the board does not support this conclusion. So, more on the Obama State of the Union and the deepening world economic depression in a minute.